The protocol for a level 3 crime scene cleanup is 17 pages long, and I have read every page of it enough times that I can recite subsections in my sleep, which I do sometimes, literally. Wake up at 3 in the afternoon with the words, "Personal protective equipment must be donned before entering the primary contamination zone," still resonating in my head like a prayer. The protocol exists because blood is a biohazard, because human remains are a biohazard, because the things that accumulate in a space where a person has died violently and been left alive are biohazards in ways that go beyond the clinical, beyond the microbial, beyond anything the 17 pages actually address, because the 17 pages are concerned with the physical, and the physical is only part of what you are dealing with when you enter a room where something terrible happened and has been sitting with its terribleness for longer than anyone should be comfortable thinking about. I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've been inside more rooms like that than I'm going to count tonight. And there's one room in Houston, Texas, that I'm still inside, in some part of my head that the protocol does not cover every single night when I close my eyes. My name does not matter for purposes of this account. What matters is that I am a level 3 crime scene cleanup technician operating out of a company based in Houston, Texas, and that on a Wednesday night in October, I received a dispatch for a cleanup at an address in the East End neighborhood that I had not worked before, a 4-story apartment building that had been partially vacated due to a code violation situation with the building management, which meant that the building was in a transitional state between occupied and abandoned, which is a state that produces, in residential structures, a particular quality of atmosphere. The atmosphere of a place that used to be full of human life and is in the process of forgetting what that was like. The specific apartment I was dispatched to was Unit 3C. The incident report that my company receives from the contracting party, in this case the building management company, contains the nature of the incident, the date of discovery, the estimated time since incident, and any specific notes from the initial police processing. The nature of the incident was listed as unattended death. The date of discovery was 4 days prior to my dispatch. The estimated time since incident was listed as unknown, which is the way the report indicates that the time of death was not determinable from the state of the remains, which tells an experienced technician something specific and unpleasant about the condition of the scene. The specific notes field contained one entry. Unit has been sealed since initial processing. Ventilation disconnected at building level. Access through building manager only. I arrive at the building at 2:14 in the morning. Night dispatch exists because cleanup work is invisible work, meaning that the companies who contract it prefer it done when the fewest possible people will observe it being done, which is a reasonable preference and one that suits me, because I have found over 6 years that there is a quality of focus available at 2 in the morning that daytime work does not produce, a narrowed attention, a clarity that comes from the absence of the ordinary world's noise and movement and light, and that quality of focus is useful in work that requires you to be very specifically present in spaces that make presence uncomfortable. My partner tonight is a man named Roland who has been in the industry for 11 years and who is the most methodical human being I have ever worked with, a man for whom the protocol is not a set of requirements, but a form of meditation, a ritual of safe passage through contaminated space. And his presence on any scene makes the scene manageable in a way that I have come to depend on with a dependency I try not to think about too carefully, because thinking about dependencies in this work leads to questions about what exactly you are depending on someone for. The building manager, a heavy-set man in his 60s who smells of cigarettes and seems acutely unhappy about being present at 2 in the morning, which is understandable, lets us in through the main entrance and gives us the key to 3C and tells us the elevator is not working due to the code violation situation and that the third floor has partial power, meaning the hallway lights function, but the unit itself will need our own lighting, which we have. He tells us the unit has been sealed since the police finished processing 4 days ago. He tells us the smell reaches the hallway outside the unit, and he would appreciate it if we could contain that efficiently, because there are still residents on the second and fourth floors. He does not look at us when he says any of this. He looks at a point on the wall behind us with the expression of a man who is doing what the situation requires and would like to be somewhere else. I understand. I would like to be somewhere else too, in the particular way that I always want to be somewhere else at the beginning of a level 3 scene, but the wanting and the being are two different things, and I'm very good at the being. The stairwell to the third floor smells like a stairwell, concrete and paint, and the faint background odor of a building with deferred maintenance. At the second floor landing, I can detect the first edge of the scene smell, faint but unmistakable, the compound of organic decomposition that no description does justice to, and that no amount of professional exposure ever fully normalizes. It is a smell that is specific to the end of biological processes, to the chemistry of what happens to a human body when the systems that maintain it stop, and it activates something in the hindbrain that is not rational, not professional, not something the 17 pages of protocol can address, because it is the smell of death, and the hindbrain knows what that means in terms that are older than language. Roland and I don masks to the second floor, landing without discussing it. We are already in Tyvek suits, glove-booted. The masks go on, and the smell reduces to manageable. Not gone. Managed. The third floor hallway is lit by 2 working fluorescent tubes, one of which is flickering at a frequency that makes the light strobe slightly, throwing the hallway into an alternation of yellow light and brief dim between them. Unit 3C is the third door on the left. The police seal is intact across the door frame, the yellow tape with its printed warning, and I photographed the intact seal for our documentation before Roland cuts it. He cuts it with the same calm precision that he does everything, and he unlocks the door, and we push it open. The smell hits us even through the masks, a wave of it, the door having held a concentration that releases all at once into the relatively fresher air of the hallway, and I hear Roland make a small sound, not distress exactly, more acknowledgement, the sound of a professional receiving information they did not need the mask to provide. I document the threshold with my camera before we enter. Unit 3C is a studio apartment, 1 main room with a kitchenette along one wall and a bathroom through a door at the far end, approximately 350 square feet. The windows are sealed, the ventilation has been disconnected, as the building manager said, and the heat of the room is the trapped accumulated heat of a sealed space in a Texas October, which is still warm, which is warm enough for processes, which is warm enough that the 4-day estimate on the incident report is doing more work than it looks like. I'm not going to describe the scene in the specific way that scene descriptions get described in accounts of this kind of work, because that is not what this account is about. What this account is about is what happened at 2:47 in the morning in Unit 3C, which is a thing that I have discussed with Roland once, briefly, standing in the parking lot of a Whataburger at 4 in the morning after the job was done, and which we have not discussed since. Not because we disagree about what happened, but because we agree entirely, and the agreement is not something that either of us knows what to do with. We have been working for 33 minutes. I am on my knees on the main floor, running an enzymatic cleaner over the primary contamination area, working in the methodical, overlapping passes that the protocol specifies, and Roland is in the bathroom running a preliminary assessment of what secondary contamination is present in that space. I am working, and I am in the state of focused professional attention that this work requires. The state where the smell is managed and the sight is managed, and the mind is engaged with the physical task, and not with the implications of the physical task. And I am in that state when the smell changes. This requires some context. Decomposition smell is not a single smell. It is a layered compound of multiple organic compounds at various stages of their own processes, and it changes as you work, as you introduce the enzymatic agents, as the air circulation of your own movement disturbs the settled atmospheric layers in a room. Experienced technicians know this and account for it. What I am describing is not the change that enzymatic introduction produces. What I am describing is a change that should not be happening, that has no chemical or procedural cause, that is not the result of anything Roland or I have introduced to the scene. The smell changes from a specific compound of decomposition, which is terrible but known, to something different underneath it, something that the decomposition smell has been covering. Something that was there before the decomposition and is not organic in any biological sense. It is cold in character. That is the best description I have, a cold smell, and it does not belong to any compound in my professional experience, and my professional experience is extensive. I stop working. I have my face close to the floor, and I raise my head and I listen, which is the instinct. And the apartment is quiet except for the faint sound of Roland moving in the bathroom and the flicker of the work light we brought, which, like the hallway fluorescent, has a slight strobe quality, and the hum of the city outside sealed windows. And then, underneath all of those things, a sound that is either there or not there, depending on which part of my attention I direct toward it. A low, continuous tone that is not mechanical, not building noise, not traffic, and is coming from the wall directly in front of me, the wall that faces east, the exterior wall of the building, the wall behind which there is nothing but air, and the East End neighborhood, and the city of Houston going about its 3 a.m. business. I call Roland's name. He comes out of the bathroom, and I do not need to explain because he stops in the bathroom doorway and tilts his head, and I know from 11 years of Roland's body language that he has heard it too. We look at each other across the yellow-lit studio apartment that smells of death and something older than death. Roland says, very quietly, air in the walls. I say yes. Neither of us believes this. We have both worked enough buildings to know what air in walls sounds like, and we're both saying air in the walls the way that people say what is probably nothing when they mean something that they are not ready to name. I go back to work. This is the professional decision, the protocol decision, the decision of a person who has a job to do and a contract to fulfill and a partner who is watching to see what they do. I go back to my overlapping enzymatic passes. The sound in the wall continues at the same low, undifferentiated tone. The smell underneath, the decomposition smell continues. And then, at 2:47 by my watch, the work light goes out. Not flickers. Goes out. The apartment is in complete darkness for a period of time that I am placing it between 4 and 6 seconds. Long enough to be real, long enough to be wrong. Long enough for the darkness to be the specific quality of darkness that a sealed room with no windows open at 3 in the morning produces, which is a darkness with weight, and in that darkness the sound in the wall changes. It does not get louder. It gets clearer. We finish the job. For more hours, every protocol step, every documentation photograph, every enzymatic treatment, and physical removal and surface sealing. We finish the job because we are professionals and because the alternative to finishing is leaving a scene incomplete, and we do not leave scenes incomplete. We are in the parking lot of the Whataburger at 4:17 in the morning, and Roland has a coffee, and I have a coffee, and neither of us has said anything in the truck on the way from the building, and Roland says, the wall. I say yes. He says, what do you think? I think for a while. I say, I think that there are things that accumulate in spaces where people have died that are not biological and are not chemical and are not covered in the 17 pages of protocol. And I think that those things are the reason that some scenes feel different from other scenes in a way that has nothing to do with the physical conditions and everything to do with something that 6 years of professional exposure has given me no framework for understanding, but has given me a very clear ability to recognize. Hold on, no. He drinks his coffee. He says, we're going back in there next week. The secondary treatment. I know. He says, I'll bring the extra lights. I say, bring the extra lights. He says the good ones. I say, bring the good ones. We sit in the parking lot until the sun starts coming up over Houston, and neither of us mentions the east wall again. And I have thought about it every single night since, and I have no more of an explanation now than I did at 2:47 in the morning in a sealed studio apartment in the East End. And I suspect I never will. And I suspect, on some level that I cannot formalize, that whatever was in that wall understood my suspicion and was entirely comfortable with it. Story number 2. The refrigeration unit in the Corpus Christi morgue runs at a temperature of 34 degrees Fahrenheit and produces a hum that I can feel in the soles of my feet through the tile floor and in my back teeth through my jaw when I stand in certain positions, and which has been, for the 3 years I have worked as a forensic technical specialist in this facility, the constant background note of every hour I've spent in this building. I know this hum the way you know the sounds of a house you have lived in for years. It's a normal register, it's a normal variation, the slight uptick it produces at startup after a door opening, the slight settling when temperatures stabilize. I know it well enough that on the night of February 8th, when the hum changed, I knew immediately, without checking any instrument, without opening any access panel, without consulting any technical manual. I knew the way you know when the rhythm of something you have learned completely begins to diverge from what it should be. The refrigeration unit was not running differently. Something in the room was running differently. The hum I was hearing had acquired a component that the unit could not account for. I need to give you the context of the room before I describe what I experienced in it. Because the context matters, because a place is not just its physical dimensions, but also its function and its history and its accumulated weight of what has happened inside it. And the Corpus Christi County Morgue is a place with a specific kind of weight that is unlike the weight of any other workplace I've been in, which is the weight of biological finality, the weight of all the endings that have come through these doors and laid down on these tables and been processed by these instruments and the hands of people like me who deal with those endings professionally and clinically and necessarily with a practice distance that is the only functional approach to work that would otherwise dismantle a person completely. The morgue receives bodies from the surrounding county, from law enforcement, from hospitals, from the medical examiner's field response. On any given night, the cold storage contains between 6 and 20 cases in various stages of processing. They are bagged, tagged, shelved. The room is maintained at 34 degrees, which inhibits but does not stop biological processes, meaning that the room is cold and the room smells of cold, and under the cold, very faintly, of what cold delays but does not prevent. My job as a forensic technical specialist includes preparation of the autopsy suite for scheduled procedures, maintenance of the instrumentation, documentation support, and secondary handling during the procedures themselves. On nights when there are no scheduled procedures, which is most nights, I am responsible for the facility, its documentation, its temperature logs, its security. I am, on most nights, alone in a building with the county's dead, which is a condition that requires either a particular kind of disposition or a particular kind of numbness. And after 3 years, I am genuinely unsure which one I have developed. The autopsy suite is adjacent to the cold storage room, separated by a door with a small wire-reinforced window. On a normal night, I prepare the suite first, which means cleaning and sterilizing the tables, calibrating the scales and the documentation equipment, checking the drainage system, laying out the instrument trays for the next day's schedule. This takes approximately 90 minutes, and I have done it enough times that the process is nearly automatic. My hands doing what they know while my mind is only partially present, which is the state in which I am most comfortable in the suite, the state that allows me to do the work without the work doing too much to me. The fluorescent lighting in the suite is what fluorescent lighting in older institutional buildings always is: slightly too bright and slightly too cold, and subject to the kind of minor electrical fluctuation that produces, in individual tubes, a barely perceptible irregularity that is not quite a flicker, but is not quite a steady light either. I notice that the way you notice the hum of the refrigeration unit as background, as the texture of the environment rather than as information. February 8th. I arrive 11 p.m. for my shift. The building is quiet. The day staff have been gone for 3 hours. The parking lot is empty except for my vehicle and the facility van. I sign in, I check the temperature logs. I note that storage is at 34.2 and within acceptable parameters. I begin my suite preparation. Everything is as it should be for the first 40 minutes. I am sterilizing the second table when the hum changes. I have described what I mean by this. Not the refrigeration unit's operating frequency, but something that has been introduced to it. A new component, a harmonic that the unit is not producing, but that the unit's vibration is somehow carrying, the way a wine glass can carry the resonance of a sound produced elsewhere and amplify it through its own structure. I stop working. I stand with the sterilization cloth in my hand, and I listen, and the hum in the floor and in my back teeth is different from what it has been for 3 years, and the difference is not subtle. It is specific. It has a shape, not a tone, a shape. I walk to the door between the suite and the cold storage room. The wire-reinforced window gives me a view of the cold storage room, the rows of shelving units, the body bags in their assigned positions, the overhead lights, which are on a motion sensor and should be off because nothing in the cold storage room has moved. The overhead lights are on, not flickering, not partially illuminated, fully on. I watch the room through the window for 30 seconds. Nothing moves. The lights should not be on. There is no motion sensor trigger that I can account for. No person in the room, no mechanical disturbance that would activate the sensor. I open the door. The cold storage room is 34.2 degrees, and the breath I exhale in it is visible, and the hum is louder in here. The floor vibration stronger, and the lights are on, and the room is still, and all the shelving units are as I log them at 11 p.m. when I check the temperature, all cases in position, all bags in position. I walk the perimeter of the room. Everything is correct. Everything is exactly as it should be. I am almost to the door back to the suite when I see the bag on the third shelf of the north unit. It is a case that has been in storage for 6 days. A Jane Doe, unidentified, awaiting additional forensic processing. The bag is a standard white polyethylene body bag, sealed at the top with a heavy-duty zip and a secondary tie, logged at a weight that I know from my documentation work. It is in its assigned position on the shelf, and it is moving, not violently, not dramatically. The movement is small, a slow shift in the settled weight of the bag, the kind of movement that a filled bag makes when the contents redistribute. And I know, technically, rationally, professionally, what causes that kind of movement in cold storage, which is a combination of gas accumulation from ongoing biological process and temperature gradient shifts that cause material to settle and resettle. And I know this, and I am applying this knowledge to what I'm seeing, and I'm doing fine with the application of this knowledge right up until the bag moves again. Differently, a movement that is not a settling of material, that goes against the direction of the previous settle, that moves toward the top of the bag, toward the sealed end, in the direction that would be consistent with something inside the bag lifting toward the seal from below. And I stop applying the knowledge of gas accumulation and temperature gradients because gas accumulation and temperature gradients do not move upward against a previous gravity-driven settle. And I am 3 feet from that shelf, and the fluorescent tubes and the overhead lights begin their irregular fluctuation. Not the nearly imperceptible variation I described as background, but a genuine strobe, a rapid alternation of light and dim that makes the cold storage room into a series of still frames. And in the still frames, the bag on the 3rd shelf of the north unit is different in each one. Not wildly different, not horror movie different, differently settled, differently positioned by fractions of an inch between each dark interval. The way a thing moves when it moves slowly, and the light that reveals it is intermittent. I leave the cold storage room. I close the door between the storage room and the suite. I stand in the suite with my back against the cold steel of the second table, and I look at the wire-reinforced window and through it the cold storage room, where the lights are on and the bag on the north unit 3rd shelf is still. The hum from the floor has returned to its normal register. Not returned gradually, not transitioned. Returned to its normal frequency in the same moment I close the door, as cleanly as if a switch were thrown. I stand with my back against the table for a long time, long enough for my professional processing to arrive, which it does eventually, because it always does, because the professional processing is what I have developed over 3 years, precisely for moments that require it, and moments do not get more requiring than this. I go back into the cold storage room. I walk to the north unit. I check the bag on the 3rd shelf. It is sealed. It is in position. The weight distribution is consistent with what the documentation indicates. I check the temperature of the room from the wall sensor. 34.2. I check the motion sensor. According to its log, it has not triggered. According to its log, the lights have been off since 11:12 p.m. when I entered the storage room on my initial check. According to every instrument and log in this facility, nothing happened in the cold storage room tonight. According to every instrument and log in this facility, the lights did not come on. The hum did not change. The bag on the 3rd shelf of the north unit did not move. According to my own experience of the last 45 minutes, every one of those things happened. The instruments and the logs in my experience do not agree. And in any confrontation between instruments and experience in my profession, instruments win, which means that for purposes of any official record, nothing happened tonight in Corpus Christi. I still work this facility. The Jane Doe from the 3rd shelf of the north unit was identified 6 weeks after that night through a national database match. A woman from Brownsville, 43 years old. She has been released to her family. The shelf she occupied has been filled and vacated 3 times since. The hum of the refrigeration unit has been its normal hum on every subsequent night. The lights in the cold storage room have not come on without a motion trigger since February 8th. But I have added something to my routine in the months since that night. At the end of my sterilization work, before I leave the suite, I stand at the wire-reinforced window for 60 seconds and I look into the cold storage room and I observe. Not looking for anything specific, not expecting anything specific. Simply acknowledging the room and its contents in a way that feels, though I cannot explain the logic of this, like the correct thing to do. Like a protocol that the 17 pages of any manual in this profession will never include, but that the profession itself, the actual work, the actual presence in these spaces with these particular contents, eventually teaches you. You acknowledge the room. You stand at the window. You observe, and whatever is in the room, biological, chemical, professional, or something that none of those words cover, knows that you have. And the relationship between you and it, whatever that relationship is maintained. And the hum stays normal. And you go home the gray early morning, and you sleep, and you come back the next night, and you stand at the window again, and the acknowledgement continues. And this is, I have decided, enough. This is for now enough. Story number 3. The glowing is the last item on the decontamination checklist. It is not on the decontamination checklist. What I mean is that glowing walls are not a line item on any decontamination checklist that has ever been written for any biohazard remediation protocol in any regulatory framework I have been trained under, and I have been trained under 3 different federal frameworks and 2 state-specific ones. And none of them address what my headlamp is showing me on the walls of Lab 7 in this facility in San Jose, because none of them anticipated that a wall could do what these walls are doing, which is produce light, not reflect light. Produce it from within the material of the wall itself, a cold blue-green light that does not pulse and does not flicker, but sits at a constant low output, barely visible when my headlamp is at full power, but present, unmistakably present, the moment I angle the lamp away, the moment I reduce the beam, the moment I allow any darkness into the room that these walls can fill with their own illumination. I am a biohazard remediation technician. This is a job with a specific scope and a specific set of protocols and a specific understanding of what it encounters, which is biological contamination, meaning pathogens, meaning blood and bodily fluid and medical waste and laboratory spillage of the known varieties. The classified hazards with their classified decontamination procedures and their classified disposal chains and their regulatory documentation that follows every step from initial contact to final confirmation of site. Clearance. I have been doing this work for 7 years. I have worked hospital isolation wards. I have worked research facilities that contained agents with names that most people have only heard in news reports about outbreaks. I have worked the kind of scenes that require level A suits and self-contained breathing apparatus and decontamination showers on exit and medical monitoring for 30 days afterward. I know the range of what biohazard remediation encounters. The glowing walls of Lab 7 are not in the range. The facility in San Jose is a private research operation, the kind that occupies an unremarkable industrial building on an unremarkable industrial street and gives nothing away from its exterior about what happens inside. I know the company name because it is on the contract my company received. I'm not going to use the company name. The facility has 4 designated laboratory spaces, Lab 4 through Lab 7, numbered sequentially for what I understand was a previous numbering system that began somewhere else. Labs 4, 5, and 6 are standard research spaces, the kind I have worked 100 times, stainless steel counters, sealed floors, HEPA ventilation, clean and straightforward. Lab 7 is accessed through a secondary corridor that requires a separate access code, which the facility manager provides to me on a card before she leaves the building. She provides the card, and then she looks at me for a moment, and she says, "The spill in Lab 7 has been isolated for 72 hours, and the area is sealed." I say, "What is the nature of the spill?" She says, "Unknown." I say, "Unknown meaning the documentation hasn't reached me yet, or unknown meaning you don't know what the substance is?" She looks at me for a long moment. She says both. She says, "The substance was in a container that was not labeled in any way that our facility staff could interpret." She says the spill occurred when the container failed at approximately 11 p.m. 3 nights ago, and our overnight researcher, who is the only person who was present, left the building and has not returned. I say, "Where's the researcher now?" She says, "We don't know." She says, "The facility has filed the appropriate missing person report." She says this in a way that suggests she is reciting a prepared statement, which is the way people speak when lawyers have been involved. I say, "The appropriate reports to my regulatory authority have been filed?" She says yes. She says everything is in order. She says she needs the space cleared and remediated. She gives me the access card and she leaves, and I am alone in a biohazard remediation context with unknown substance, missing personnel, a container of uninterpretable origin, in a room I have not yet entered. My partner on this job is a technician named Sarah, who has 5 years in the industry and who has worked more difficult sites than most people in this field ever see, and who has a constitution for this work that I have described to people as the most functional professional indifference I have ever observed, meaning that Sarah processes the unusual as rapidly as a very good computer and outputs a decontamination strategy without the kind of emotional loading that slows most people down. Sarah is my first call when a job has parameters outside the normal, and this job has parameters outside the normal. I call Sarah. I describe the situation. There's a pause that by Sarah's standards is a long pause. Sarah says, unknown substance, 72-hour isolation, missing researcher. I say yes. Another pause. Sarah says, I can be there in 45 minutes. I say I'll wait. We enter Lab 7 together. The access card opens the secondary corridor, and the corridor is a narrow white-painted space with sealed floors and strip lighting and the smell of the facility's general air, clean and slightly antiseptic, the baseline smell of a well-maintained research space. At the end of the corridor is the door to Lab 7, a standard steel-faced fire door with a wire-reinforced window and a keypad for which the facility manager has also provided the code. The seal on the door is a standard hazmat tape seal, intact, applied by whoever secured the lab 3 nights ago. I photograph it. Sarah cuts it. We key in the code. The door opens. The smell that comes through the door is not the smell I expected, and I expected nothing pleasant. I have smelled the range of what biological spills produce, and the range is wide, and nothing in that range matches what comes through the door of Lab 7, which is not biological in any way my 7 years of experience can classify. It is mineral almost, stone-like, the smell of a cave, of deep wet rock, but concentrated, and under it's something else that I cannot name because it does not correspond to any compound in my professional vocabulary. A smell that is almost electrical, but is not almost metallic, but is not almost nothing at all, but is very precisely something. We stand in the doorway, and we both breathe this smell through our Level B suits and our supplied air, and it is still reaching us because no filtration system short of completely isolated breathing apparatus prevents smell molecules from eventually finding their way to receptors, and what we are breathing is whatever the air of Lab 7 has been for 72 hours, and we are looking at what our headlamps reveal. The spill originated from a point near the center of the lab floor. I can see the container, a vessel of approximately 2-liter capacity, made of a material I cannot identify from the door, something that is neither glass nor plastic nor any polymer I have handled, something that sits on the floor with the quality of wrongness that objects have when they do not behave the way their apparent materials should. This container sitting too still, too heavy looking for its size, and around it a spill radius of approximately 6 feet of a substance that is dried too. The floor in the 72 hours of isolation, a substance that looks, in the full beam of my headlamp, like a dark stain, dark blue-black, with an irregular edge pattern that is more complex than any liquid spill I have seen, not the random fractal edge of surface tension release, but something with a structure, a branching structure, the kind you see in frost patterns or mineral crystallization, organized, repeated, spreading from the central container in branches that have sub-branches that have sub-branches, a pattern that my headlamp illuminates and that I am looking at and that I recognize from the biological sciences I studied before this career as the growth pattern of something. Not a spill spreading, something growing from a spill. Something that grew outward from the container in the 72 hours of isolation and reached the walls of Lab 7 and climbed them, and has been, I understand as I angle my headlamp up toward the ceiling, growing across the ceiling of the room as well. These branching dark patterns on every surface, floor to ceiling. And when I reduce the angle of my headlamp, when I take the direct beam off the wall and let the ambient light of Sarah's headlamp be the primary illumination, the walls glow. Sarah and I stand in the doorway for a long time. I am running through my classification procedures in my head, every category of known biological agent with bioluminescent properties, every fungal and bacterial class with growth patterns of this type, every contamination scenario in my training that might account for what I am looking at, and I'm reaching the end of that running through without having arrived at anything that fits. I say to Sarah, "What's your read?" Sarah says nothing for a moment. Sarah's light moves slowly across the ceiling of Lab 7, across the branching patterns that glow at the edge of darkness. And then Sarah says, "I have no red." I say, "Meaning what?" Sarah says, "Meaning I have no classification for this. Meaning I have no protocol for this." I say, "We have a contract." Sarah says, "We have a contract for biohazard remediation, and this may be beyond the scope of the contract as written." I say, "What do you mean beyond the scope?" Sarah looks at me. Sarah says, "I mean, what are we decontaminating to?" Meaning, if we apply standard decontamination agents to a substance we cannot classify, we may produce a reaction we cannot predict. Meaning, what kills this? I do not have an answer. Sarah does not have an answer. The walls of Lab 7 glow quietly in the reduction of our headlamp beams, steady and patient, and the branching patterns on the floor send their sub-branches toward the door, toward the corridor, toward us, stopping approximately 3 feet from the threshold, which may be the limit of 72 hours of growth, or maybe something else, some awareness of the threshold, some choice about it. And I am aware that I am thinking about an awareness and a choice in relation to a substance that should not be aware and should not be choosing, and I am aware that I am thinking this, and I am not sure whether to trust my thinking or to trust my 7 years of professional experience that is telling me to apply the sodium hypochlorite solution and scrub the floors and surfaces and clear the lab by morning. I'm not sure which of these two directions is the one that leads to the morning I expect. I call the facility emergency line. The facility manager answers. I tell her I need documentation on the origin of the substance and the nature of the research, because my team cannot proceed with remediation of an unclassified substance without at least basic material characterization data. There is a pause on the line that is long enough to be its own answer. The facility manager says the researcher who was working with the substance was the only person with full knowledge of its origin and characterization. I say, I understand he is missing. I say, but there must be documentation, lab notes, a research record. She says, the researcher's records have been reviewed by our compliance team and the relevant regulatory authority. She says, there is no documentation of the substance's origin in any format the compliance team could locate. She says this in the same reciting a statement voice as before. I say, that is a significant problem for my ability to complete this contract. She says she understands and she will have her attorneys contact my company in the morning regarding scope adjustment. She ends the call. Sarah and I close the door of Lab 7. We reseal it with fresh tape. We log our observations in the most precise and clinical language we can produce, which is the language of surface contamination of undetermined chemical composition, bioluminescent properties potentially indicative of fungal or bacterial presence, growth pattern analysis recommended prior to remediation, contractor unable to proceed without substance classification data. We pack our equipment and we walk out of the building and we sit in the decontamination vehicle for a long time before either of us speaks. Sarah says, in 5 years I have never closed the door on a job. I say, neither have I in 7. We sit with that for a while. I am thinking about the researcher who left the building at 11 p.m. 3 nights ago and has not returned. I am thinking about what he saw when the container failed. I am thinking about whether what he saw sent him away from the building or whether what he saw is why he has not come back. I am thinking about the growth pattern stopping 3 feet from the threshold and the 72 hours it has had to reach the door, and whether the 3 feet is a limit or a decision. I say out loud to Sarah into the industrial street and the San Jose night, whatever grew on those walls in 72 hours knew enough to stop at the door. Sarah looks at me. Sarah says, "That's not a comforting thought." I say, "I know." Sarah says, "Are we going back in?" I say, "Not tonight. Not until we know what we're decontaminating to." So no. Sarah starts the engine. We drive away. The lab is still sealed. The contract is under review by attorneys. The researcher has not been found. The walls of Lab 7, as far as I know, are still glowing. And I have not slept without the light on since. Not because I'm afraid of the dark exactly, but because I've seen what can live in it, what can grow in it, what can spread across surfaces in the dark over 72 hours and stop deliberately 3 feet from a door and wait. And I would like to be able to see any room I am in clearly at all times so that I know with the certainty that only light provides exactly where the nearest wall is and exactly what is on it.